Greetings to all our esteemed English-speaking auditory. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist who is covering all actually circumstances of the full-scale invasion from Russia to Ukraine from the very beginning of its invasion. So I do this job, I do this video overview for more than 3 years. So I propose to all of you, as I said, our esteemed English-speaking auditory, to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 17th. So please join, watch this video, like it, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and leave your comments below. Let's start today's overview.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Let's talk about what's happening at the front, and I'll start with the words of the president. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, gave an interview to Sky News, and there were many statements that could be quoted. One of them, which concerns the fighting and is relevant for our review of the battle map, is what the president said, that ahead, Ukraine is expecting at least 2 more difficult offensive campaigns by the Russian Federation. The previous 3 have failed. The previous 3, we have already lived through them, were essentially the attempt to put pressure on Dobropillia and its surroundings. We survived the attempt to exert pressure in the Sumy region, and we survived the third one. I don't know, maybe the president meant to say that all those attempts the enemy made throughout the summer in Zaporizhia were also in total a kind of third campaign, which in fact did not really take place as such. If we take this into account, we really did get through these 3 campaigns very, very successfully, while the enemy failed in their execution. The president says there are 2 more ahead. Which 2 are these? In my firm belief, there are 2 directions. I could be wrong, but there are 2 directions. And I've been talking about this for the past 6 months. These are the Donetsk direction, centered around Pokrovsk, and the Kupiansk direction in the Kharkiv region. They are of great importance to the enemy. So these are the 2 offensive campaigns that the enemy may try to carry out in the fall and winter, because their priority goal is to enter populated areas before the cold, before the frost, before the foliage disappears, and there to try to gain a foothold and accordingly to start urban combat in the future. That's how I understand the president's words. If you understand them differently, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments under this video. By the way, it will be interesting to read them. Let's move on to a direct review of the battle map. Today, I will single out as the first and, in my opinion, perhaps the most difficult direction in terms of prospects, unpleasant prospects for the future, which is the Lyman front. What makes it so difficult? Let's go over a brief chronology. What is the Lyman front? The Lyman front is the intersection of major rivers. The Oskil River, which flows from Kupiansk to the south, where it joins the Serebrianka. The Serebrianka Donets, which flows here, is one of the most full-flowing rivers in Ukraine. If I'm not mistaken, it's the 4th longest river in Ukraine, if my school geography knowledge still serves me right. This is the Serebrianka Donets River. The Oskil flows into the Serebrianka Donets. Let's mark them as O, S, and D. Next, there are rivers, for example, the Chorny Jerebets or Jerebets. Here is this river, where the settlements of Zarishne and Yampil are located, where recently, and still to this day, very active fighting has been taking place. The main fighting took place in the interfluve between these rivers. There is also a small river here called Nitrius, on the banks of which fighting is currently taking place, and battles are also happening in its interfluve. In short, since 2022, from the time when Ukrainian forces liberated the Kharkiv region, there have been very serious battles here, with the advantage on the side of our country's defense forces. However, recently this advantage has started to decline significantly. Recently refers to the beginning of this year, when the enemy first pushed through our positions in the area on the left bank of the Zherebets River. This took a long time. It wasn't even just at the beginning of this year. It went on for a very long time, in parallel with the fighting here in the Serebrianska forestry. The enemy kept pressing on the right bank of the Zherebets. Eventually, this turned into a very serious problem, with the enemy breaking through beyond the Zherebets and appearing on the right bank of this river, posing a threat to the settlement of Lyman. This threat was, so to speak, eliminated, but we see that the general appendix of the presence of Russian troops on the right bank of the Zherebets River, this appendix, remains here, and essentially nothing can be done about it anymore. It can't be cut off, just like those tentacles near Pokrovsk. rather successful operation, which we will discuss today, because yesterday, after the public release of information from the General Staff that the defense forces of our country in the Pokrovsk direction, or more precisely in the Dobropillia direction, managed to liberate the settlement of Pankivka. Many military personnel began to comment, saying that supposedly, for the first time, the defense forces have cut off the Russians' tentacles. It happened. So in the Lyman direction, these tentacles, unfortunately, are too widespread. To cut them off, or to hope that they can be cut off, is a futile hope. And unfortunately, this presence, this enemy bridgehead on the right bank of the Serebrianka River, I'll highlight this bridgehead once again, this is what creates very, very serious problems for us. These problems are compounded by the fact that the enemy has also advanced in the Serebrianski forestry area right here in this zone. Accordingly, we are now facing problems in several locations along the Lyman direction, which will later turn into problems for us in Siversk and Lyman. That's one. Let's put it this way, there are still quite a few problems. Furthermore, these numerous problems could turn into issues for Sloviansk as well. These problems are already starting to appear, in fact, considering that the road between Sloviansk and Izium, this route, as you can see, is now within 20 to 25 kilometers, which is within the range of an enemy FPV drone strike from this incursion of the enemy in the Lyman direction. Sloviansk is the next step. That's a high level, that's a high risk stage in the further development of events in a negative scenario. At the moment, we are facing major operational and theater level dangers concerning Lyman and Siversk. Specifically, if we break it down and go down to the lowest, so to speak, level, that's where the fighting is happening right now. The most difficult situation, obviously, is in Dronivka. Why? Because the defense forces are also holding a section of the Serebriansky forestry. You can see this gray zone right here. This section of the Serebriansky forestry actually allows for the logistics of Dronivka, connecting it with Yampil, and accordingly, if our troops are pushed out of these remaining parts of the Serebriansky forestry, it will simply lead to the loss of Dronivka and the loss of the ability to supply it. The garrison here, which is why the Russians are applying extremely strong pressure in this area. In addition, the Russians are also advancing toward Dronivka from the direction of Serebrianka. That is, they are trying to, so to speak, surround it from several directions to some extent, cutting off its logistics. The next location is actually Yampil itself, this settlement right here. Groups of Russian soldiers have already been spotted there. Yesterday, I literally showed that here. Russians were observed changing into civilian clothes. And this is also a big problem because the large number of civilians who still haven't been evacuated allows the Russians to take advantage of this and try to blend in with the civilian population while carrying out their dirty deeds. Yampil is the gateway to Lyman. Lyman is right here, and Yampil really is such a gateway. The Yampil area connects by road to the northern district, beyond the settlement area, the settlement of Zarychne-Torske. Zarychne is on one bank of the Serebrianka River and Torske is on the other. These two settlements are on the Serebrianka River, also known as the Chorny Serebrianka. Zarychne and Yampil are connected by a road, and this road is currently under enemy fire. The enemy is also trying to fully capture the settlement of Zarychne. In Torske, right here, on this left bank of the Serebrianka River. As for the enemy present there, undoubtedly they are present. Drone operators from the 63rd Mechanized Brigade, which is part of the 3rd Army Corps, are working against them. It's worth noting that this is the area of responsibility of the 3rd Army Corps under the command of Andriy Beletsky. It's not accurate to say that the current critical situation in Lyman is due to failures or mistakes of the 3rd Army Corps. It has received, let's say, in terms of command, the 63rd Brigade was already here, as you can see in Torske, destroying the enemy who is hiding in houses, in cellars, entrenched in the settlement. The enemy is now trying to establish the same kind of fortification in Zarychne, and similarly, the enemy is trying to do the same in Yampil in order to control all the routes and all the logistical approaches to Lyman. This is currently the focus of their operation in Lyman. Their main objective is the direction they will try to move toward. Once again, here is the settlement of Lyman. It is at the highest point of the enemy's attention. In addition, pressure on Lyman is coming not only from these two directions, let's say from Zarychne and from Yampil, but also from the north. Let's move here on the deep state map. And starting from the settlement of Rydkodub and ending with the wells along this entire rather wide stretch of the front, Zelena Dolina, Shandriholov, Drobyshev, There are ongoing combat actions from the enemy's side. The 66th Mechanized Brigade, which is holding the defense here in the area of Karpivka, showed that the Russians have deployed their favorite tactic here, trying to attack with motorcycles quickly and aggressively, attempting to catch our units off guard. However, they failed to do this against the fighters of the brigade, named after Prince Mstislav the Brave. The Russians operate in groups of 3 to 5 motorcyclists, trying to use their speed to break into our positions, but in this case, this group of 5 motorcyclists was destroyed. Why? Because engineering barriers had previously been set up along their route of movement. These engineering barriers caused the Russians to lose their vehicles. In other words, they lost their main advantage, speed. As a result, without their motorcycles, they had no maneuverability and were forced to simply hide in houses somewhere. And they were then successfully finished off by the strike drone operators of the 66th Mechanized Brigade, as well as the infantrymen of the same unit in Karpivka. But overall, as I said, pressure is being exerted on Lyman literally from all sides. Literally from all sides. From the area once again to the north. In the center, you could say from Hrishain, Torske, from Yampil, from the south, Lyman is being squeezed into a kind of vice by the Russians. And in this sense, in terms of worrying prospects, this is probably one of the worst situations. In fact, the situation in Kupiansk is not very good either, even though all those dramatic episodes of breakthroughs by the occupiers were managed to be eliminated. But now, observers are recording that unfortunately the Russians have managed to penetrate quite deeply into the city of Kupiansk itself. A fairly large number of their scattered small groups of enemy infantry are spread throughout the city. Right now, it is very difficult work being carried out against them. Yes, the occupiers' losses are also quite high. According to my information, the number of occupier losses in Kupiansk over the past 2 weeks amounts to 400 people. That is irrecoverable losses, meaning 200 killed. Almost all of the infantry, but the entire city's infrastructure has been destroyed. However, the very fact that the Russians have infiltrated quite deeply, and now the work to drive the enemy out here is extremely difficult, and it's not certain that it will be resolved positively in our favor in advance, not a fact, because unfortunately, the Russians have this particular trait. Well, they really can survive in extremely difficult conditions. They really can increase in number. And where the number of Russians grows, expect problems, expect very serious problems, because their numbers far exceed ours. And regarding Kupiansk, unfortunately, it is now becoming the first populated area among those large districts that the enemy is targeting, so to speak. I can list all these settlements where they want to get in to spend the winter, because staying out in the open field is simply suicide. And to spend the winter, that's Kupiansk, that's Lyman, that's Siversk, possibly Kostiantinivka, Sloviansk, not Matorsk, that's Dobropillia, that's Pokrovsk, that's Mirnorad. These are all the settlements the enemy is trying to get into in order to actually spend the winter there. Maybe there's Orikiv, maybe the enemy will want Huliaipole, these settlements. So Kupiansk, among this whole array of settlements, became the first one the enemy managed to infiltrate. And driving them out from within the settlement itself is now a very difficult task. The third difficult area where we are engaged in fighting with, let's say, relative success for the enemy, because right now, in the Novopavlivka sector, or the Velikomikhailivsky direction, as it is now more commonly called, the enemy is pressing here, starting from Sosnivka and Novoselivka, that is from this area on the border of Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. This is already, in fact, Dnipropetrovsk region, ending basically at Berezove on those same borders between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. This sector is currently quite difficult. The general direction is towards the city of Pokrovsk, not Pokrovsk, but Pokrovska in Dnipropetrovsk region, which is located on the highway between Zaporizhzhia and Kurakove. This is where the Russians are trying to advance. It's not accurate to say they are having successes here right now, but overall the situation remains quite difficult in this direction. And Pokrovsk itself is in the focus of the enemy's attention, particularly now regarding Pokrovsk. A significant concentration has gathered here. The enemy's key forces are here, and in fact, many of our key forces as well. There is an internet unit called Observer, which reviews the movements of units that become publicly known on social networks. So actually, on this map, in the area of Shchupaltsi, let's say, near Dobropillia, you can see Ukrainian units circled in blue, and you can see it says Sumy. And Russian units are marked with a red circle or an oval, like an ellipse. This is also Sumy. And here is this naval grouping, that is the Marines, who were also redirected here from Sumy. These highlighted units show the reserves that were redirected from the Sumy-Kursk direction here to Donbass, to the Pokrovsk and Dobropillia direction. So in fact, what happened, the Russians wanted to create a threat for us in Sumy. They wanted to block the logistics of Sumy. However, it was clear to us, clear to those who analyze the front, to those who understand the front. Well, of course, not without extraordinary effort, truly extraordinary effort at times from the defense forces. It was clear that those Russian military groups would simply not be enough to block the logistics of Sumy. But to cause major trouble, for example, to reach positions from which they could shell Sumy with drones or tube artillery, theoretically the occupiers could achieve that. And so the Russians invested significant and considerable resources into this, but they did not succeed. They remain now still near Sumy, well, in the Sumy region, in the north of Sumy region, but now gradually the advantage and initiative are shifting into the hands of the Ukrainian forces. Initiative because there is hope, and that is a very important thing. There are not many places now where the enemy has the initiative. And so the Russians realize that things are going badly there, and they need to shift the initiative to where they could potentially have a major victory. The major victory of 2025 could undoubtedly be Pokrovsk. The Russians are betting on it. And it is here near Pokrovsk that they have redeployed their units in order to save those who are now perishing, so to speak, in the clutches of Dobropillia. The 51st Army units, which are essentially in a situation of danger of encirclement, are continuing their offensive toward Rodinsky and Dobropillia. Let's go back to the deep state map to make things clearer as we illustrate. So the units of the 51st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation are continuing their advance toward Rodinsky, continuing to push in that direction. Within these boundaries, they risk being cut off, of course, by our counterattacks that are currently taking place here. These counterattacks are happening in obvious locations, aiming to sever the very base of this tentacle, which in fact has already been shattered by the defense forces, probably for the first time in the entire significant history of the full-scale invasion. And the Russians were forced to redeploy a large number of their units from the Sumy region. These are the 33rd, 163rd, and 57th regiments. OSINT analysts are drawing attention to this, and it's quite an interesting story because it shows that the enemy was forced to respond to our actions. For the first time in a long while in Donbass, it looks like we dictated a certain scenario of behavior for the enemy. This doesn't mean that everything is fine or that something has significantly improved. It means that in some places on the Donetsk front, the question of initiative is starting to return to our hands. But at the same time, these concentrations of troops, this large number of forces, also mean that the decisive battle for Donbass is approaching at a very rapid pace. And this is clearly what the president is talking about, which is actually what we started today's review with. That this is one of the very difficult operations that we will still have to go through. On that note, I'll end here. Thank you for your attention. Take care. All the best. Until we meet again, please give this video a like. Now would be a great time to subscribe to